Welcome back to the channel The Stoic Way. Most men reach a certain age and quietly make a dangerous assumption. They assume their time is over. They assume attraction belongs to youth. They assume they are now invisible. But Stoicism teaches us something brutally honest. Reality doesn't care about your assumptions. Reality only responds to what you embody. And here is the uncomfortable truth many men never hear. A man does not lose attractiveness with age. He either develops it or abandons it. Because real attraction is rarely loud. It is quiet, it is slow, and it is deeply felt. When you walk into a room and people subtly adjust their behavior, when conversations pause just a little, when women feel calmer without knowing why, that is not coincidence, that is presence. Stoics believed that the strongest men were not those who demanded attention, but those who didn't need it. And if you've noticed that women feel safe around you, not excited, not nervous, not chaotic, but genuinely comfortable, then understand this clearly. Safety is not the opposite of attraction. Safety is the foundation of it, especially for women who have already experienced immaturity, inconsistency, and emotional noise. A man who doesn't rush, doesn't pressure, doesn't perform, signals something powerful, and completeness is magnetic. You see, younger men chase attention because they fear losing it. Older men who have value don't chase, they choose. If you don't feel the urge to explain yourself constantly, if you don't panic when someone pulls back, if silence doesn't threaten your identity, then you are already operating from a position of strength. Stoicism teaches emotional self-sufficiency, and nothing unsettles people more, in a good way, than a man who is emotionally independent. Your voice matters here too. Not how deep it is, not how loud it is, but how controlled it is. If you speak slowly, if you pause before responding, if people listen when you talk, not because you dominate, but because you don't waste words, that is authority. Stoics believe speech should be intentional. A man who talks less but says more is perceived as experienced, grounded, and confident. And confidence that doesn't beg to be noticed is the most dangerous kind. Silence plays a role most men misunderstand. If you can sit in silence without reaching for your phone, if you don't feel pressure to entertain, if quiet moments don't make you anxious, that silence speaks louder than words. Many women interpret silence as depth, and depth suggests layers, and layers suggest mystery. Silence says, I'm not trying to impress you, I'm present. Now let's talk about age itself, because this is where most men sabotage themselves. Trying to look young is fear disguised as effort. Dyeing hair, forcing slang, competing with boys half your age. Stoicism teaches acceptance of reality, not resistance to it. When you accept your age calmly, when you don't apologize for time written on your face, you signal something primal: survival, experience, stability. Gray hair doesn't repel attraction. Insecurity does. Lines on your face don't make you invisible. Trying to erase them does. A man who stands comfortably in his age looks like someone who has endured storms and learned from them. And women, especially younger ones, are often drawn not to chaos, but to shelter. Another quiet sign of attractiveness is how selective you are. If you don't emotionally invest too fast, if you observe behavior instead of promises, if you don't give access easily, you are signaling value. Desperation cheapens presence. Boundaries elevate it. Stoicism emphasizes discipline, not just physical, but emotional. And emotional discipline is rare. If your reactions are steady, if you don't explode, if you don't withdraw to punish, if your mood doesn't depend on someone else's approval, that predictability builds trust. And trust is deeply attractive. Not exciting at first attraction, but long-lasting attraction, the kind that stays. Finally, and this matters most, if you are at peace with yourself, if you don't hate your past, if you don't resent your age, if you don't feel the need to prove anything, then understand this: you are attractive even if you don't feel it. Because a man who has made peace with himself is no longer seeking permission to exist. Stoics believed inner harmony creates outer power, and nothing is more compelling than a man who is not fighting himself anymore. So if you've ever looked in the mirror and doubted your value, remember this: Age didn't take your attractiveness. It filtered it. It removed the noise. It removed the neediness. It removed the performance. What's left is essence. And essence doesn't shout. It resonates. There is something most men never realize until it's too late. Attraction is not something you do. It's something you radiate. And radiance doesn't come from effort. It comes from alignment. When your inner world is ordered, the outer world responds differently to you. Stoicism calls this living in accordance with nature, not pretending, not forcing, not chasing illusions. If you've lived long enough to stop lying to yourself, that alone places you ahead of the crowd. Many men fear age because age exposes truth. It removes excuses. It reveals character. A younger man can hide behind potential. An older man stands on results. And that difference is felt immediately. If you've noticed that people take your words more seriously now, even when you speak less, that's not coincidence. That's weight. Weight comes from lived experience, from scars you didn't post online, from lessons you didn't announce. Women sense this instinctively. They may not verbalize it, but they feel it. They feel when a man has faced disappointment without becoming bitter. They feel when a man has lost without becoming small. Stoicism teaches resilience without resentment, and a man who carries calm instead of anger is dangerously attractive. Another subtle shift happens with age. You stop proving and start observing. If you've reached a point where you listen more than you speak, where you notice patterns in behavior, where you're not impressed by surface charm, that discernment is attractive. It signals intelligence, patience, and control. You don't react immediately anymore. You pause. And that pause creates tension, good tension, not anxiety, not drama, but curiosity. People wonder what you're thinking. They lean in. Stoics believed mastery begins with restraint. If you can restrain words, you can restrain emotion. If you can restrain emotion, you can restrain impulse. And impulse control is one of the most underrated forms of masculinity. You also stop fearing rejection. Not because rejection doesn't happen, but because it doesn't define you. If you've noticed that rejection no longer shakes your identity, that you don't personalize every no, that emotional independence is rare, and rarity creates value. You don't negotiate attraction, you allow it, or you walk away. Walking away calmly is one of the strongest signals a man can send. Stoicism reminds us, you cannot control outcomes, only conduct. And strong conduct creates respect. Another thing changes with time. Your presence becomes grounded. You don't rush into rooms. You don't rush conversations. You don't rush decisions. If your movements are slower, deliberate, and intentional, people notice. Slowness is often mistaken for weakness, but controlled slowness is confidence. Fast movements come from anxiety. Calm movements come from certainty. Certainty doesn't ask for approval. And approval seeking is unattractive. A man who knows who he is doesn't advertise it. He lets others discover it. Women, especially in age gap dynamics, often feel exhausted by emotional unpredictability. They are drawn to men whose emotional climate is stable. If you don't punish with silence, if you don't test with jealousy, if you don't manipulate with distance, that emotional maturity feels safe, and safety allows desire to breathe. Stoicism never taught emotional coldness. It taught emotional mastery. There is a difference. Cold men disconnect. Masterful men remain present without losing themselves. If you can stay present during conflict, if you don't escalate, if you don't collapse, that steadiness builds attraction over time. Not instantly, but deeply. And depth lasts longer than excitement. Another sign you may overlook. You no longer feel the need to impress. You don't flex stories. You don't exaggerate achievements. You don't compete in conversations. If your confidence is quiet, if your success doesn't need witnesses, if your life feels private and protected, that mystery works in your favor. Stoics valued simplicity. A simple life, a clear mind, a stable character. Complex men create chaos. Simple men create peace. Peace is addictive. And finally, there is this, perhaps the clearest sign of all. If you wake up without urgency to prove yourself, if you're comfortable alone, if solitude feels like rest, not punishment, then you have crossed a threshold many men never reach. You are no longer chasing validation. You are living from acceptance. Acceptance doesn't make you passive, it makes you powerful. Because when you accept yourself, nothing external can threaten you. And a man who cannot be threatened emotionally cannot be controlled. That level of inner freedom is rare, and rarity attracts attention, even when you're not asking for it. So if you still doubt your attractiveness, ask yourself this instead. Do I feel centered? Do I feel grounded? Do I feel complete? If the answer is yes, then your value is already speaking for you. You don't need to convince anyone. Age didn't weaken you, it clarified you. It removed what was unnecessary. It sharpened what mattered. And what remains is a man who doesn't beg to be seen, but is impossible to ignore. Thank you for watching our video till the end. Stay connected with us and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, The Stoic Way, for the next video.